welcome to Higher PhD Alternative Career Path Success Stories, ACPSS. I'm Connie, your host today. One of Higher PhD Career Society's mission is to help people with masters and PhDs to navigate careers outside of academia. We learn many transferable skills that can be applicable to many jobs and industries. However, one challenging thing for us to get a job outside of it is that we don't know what our options are out there. So this series' objective is to showcase stories of people with masters or PhDs who have made a successful transition to a non-academic career path that you might or might not know about. So if you're interested to hear more of this series, please subscribe down below to get notified of our upcoming videos. Hey, I'm super excited to introduce you to Corey. He's in medical affairs, and welcome again. We're thrilled to have you today, Corey.
Thanks for having me.
So first, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself? I'm super curious.
Yeah, so I have a circuitous career path. Right now, my job title is head of medical affairs at a company called Allergy Research Group, or ARG. And ARG provides dietary supplements primarily to healthcare practitioners. And so I have a really cool job because I get to interact with other R&D folks. I get to work with new product development. I get to work on marketing, medical strategy. So a variety of different things in my current role.
And how did you get to your current role?
Yeah, I started in the nutraceutical industry in 2009, so it's been a minute, and kind of worked my way up. My first job actually in medical affairs was essentially like an extension of customer service to answer technical questions for healthcare practitioners for a very large distributorship. So, I mean, if you're in the pharmaceutical world, you know that you can be really good at a handful of products. Well, this company had 20,000 products. Some of them had overlap, but some of them were very unique. And so it was 300 different companies. And I got to learn very quickly a lot about the industry and both the companies, the products, and was be able to answer some of those questions that had come in either about quality or whether about efficacy or clinical decision making. So really kind of a cool start. That, jump in my DeLorean with me and kind of move on. I was promoted a couple times within that company. I got a job running medical education for a relative startup, and they worked on both the retail side of dietary supplements as well as the healthcare practitioner. And then I said I really like the healthcare practitioner roots and that channel. And so I worked exclusively in the healthcare practitioner channel for another fairly large company in the space. And actually I was brought on there as just a writer. They wanted a medical writer, content stuff, working through some of the material that maybe had come out of the research to translate that into clinical practice. And after maybe 6 months of being a medical writer, and actually it was a contract medical writer, it wasn't even as an employee, as a contract medical writer, they said, well, you can kind of talk. We should probably have you do like a speaking thing. So I worked with essentially the medical science liaisons at that time. And I did like a 15-city tour talking about some of the really specific science that went into the products that they were highlighting at that time. And that was a really great opportunity because it was a growth pattern for me to get into and see how new product development works, so I could watch what they were doing, and ultimately ended up taking over new product development for that company, which gave me a lot of neat skills to do that a couple more times. So I went to another company, did a lot of the same kind of work, and then that transitioned me to where I am today. So that was a super long answer to say I really did build skills within these medical affairs so that I was finally ready to kind of head it up.
Wow, this is actually covers so many different roles that were fresh out of PhD. I remember when I was just about to finish and people would say, oh, MSL could be the one, but getting in MSL, the first step is almost impossible for
That's hard.
if you're not MSL before. I got lucky.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. But like medical writer is one of them. And
Yes.
how? Yeah. Yes.
And medical writer, that's sort of a generic term now, and
Mm,
it's but there's really cool stuff because you can be on the medical writer side of things of like grants and publications. So I kind of refer to that as like the more internal medical writing.
mm.
You can be on the, hey, this is the raw data and we need this written up for publication. And you can also be on the more commercial side where I've spent most of my time creating compelling and interesting ways to communicate the science to the customer. And in my case, it's primarily been healthcare practitioners.
Oh, okay. So there. Oh, I didn't even know there's so different categories of medical writers. Yeah.
The part that's cool about medical writing, and so I'm trying not to oversell it, but it really has been like a key way in for me, and I think it is for a lot of
Mm,
other people. You also interface a lot with the regulatory affairs and compliance teams. And for example, our MSL team, they have to follow certain compliance and regulatory rules, and that can be a pretty steep learning curve. But as a medical writer, you sort of have the inside scoop. You've worked with
oh.
the lawyers, the regulatory people, so that you kind of know how they think and feel before kind of being thrust into the field and having to do it yourself. So that's been
Mm.
I've just felt really lucky to be able to have that opportunity.
Such an eye opener because I was writing to MSL. I didn't do anything else. And yeah, the regulatory side was really daunting. I feel
Yes.
like I was like tiptoeing everywhere.
Yep.
Yeah. And then medical education, that's another thing. It's just so many pros that in your career path that you have. I want to maybe touch on a little bit if you think that's the way to go, but feel free.
Yeah, it
So,
is.
yeah.
And yeah, let me share about that. The medical education piece of it
Mm,
was helping to understand both in a compliant and a commercial way how to talk about things. So if we wanted to talk about things and we wanted to dive really deep into the science, the nutraceutical industry is a little bit different than drug or medical device in that way. So if we wanted to show about science, we had to kind of genericize our product and be able to communicate that. If so, we wanted to talk about a science on generalized anxiety disorder, we couldn't at the same time talk about product, which seems a little bit crazy, but that's the regulatory environment of dietary supplements. So we would talk generically about, okay, this ingredient was studied in this way, and these were the outcomes, and we could say essentially what was the truth. And then if we ever wanted to translate that into commercial output and educate or train practitioners on how to use the product, then there was a wall. There was a wall that you couldn't ever pass of talking about disease states. So instead of saying this was studied in generalized anxiety disorder, it may be softened language. They call it structure function compliance. That language would be more like supports occasional anxiety. And so that's why if you ever pick up a dietary supplement, you might see that disclaimer that says the FDA has not approved the claims of this product. It's not intended to prevent, cure, mitigate, or diagnose disease. That is there because of this wall that was created in 1994 under an act called the Deshay Act.
Oh, oh, that's very interesting.
So medical education takes on a couple of roles. So long story
Mm,
short on that one,
mm,
you have to be able to do both,
mm.
but not right away. When I first learned how to do all of this, I was a deer in the headlights. It was all a foreign language, and now I speak fluently in the compliant language, and I'll say that the non-compliant or the science language.
Education side, like how do you advise people who might want to get in? Do you think it's still medical writer in is a way or is there other ways to get in?
I would say that my experience has been that's the easiest. And instead of talking about my experience, maybe I'll talk about the experience of people that I've hired or brought on to my team. I've had, because it's dietary supplements, nutritionists commonly come to me and as part of my team, and all they did a master's degree or a PhD in nutrition science, And so they know the science forwards and backwards. But if I get them starting to write in just the science methodology, and then I teach them small parts on how to convert that into compliant language, pretty quickly they can do sort of whatever in the industry. So I always grab my favorite students. So I've never been a full-time professor. I've always been adjunct, or I made it to assistant professor once. Yay. I always grab my best students. And so I had a gal in particular who was a mom, and she's like, I'm really busy with my kids and all this sort of stuff, but I want to learn this, and I'm in clinical practice. I want to be able to apply these, what I've learned. And so I took her on a little bit of a 6-month path. I mean, she got paid that whole time. It wasn't an unpaid internship or anything. But I gave her these little projects that grew and grew and grew. And interestingly enough, after those 6 months, I just sort of was hands off, and I could throw things over my shoulder to her, and she was able to do it. And to take her career path even further, she then worked for another company, and I supported that. She got hired by another company, and then got hired by an even larger company. And now she works for one of the largest nutraceutical companies in the world, and essentially does medical writing and medical education for them. So her career path is actually very similar to probably 5 or 6 other people that I've carried through to be able to do that. So yes, I'm biased that medical writing is the way in, but if you don't love writing, it can be a slog. Like if it doesn't come naturally to you to translate things into words, it can be really hard. But I think it's a skill that most people should at least try out.
Yeah, it's like you need to have it, doesn't matter what. Like I don't like writing, so I didn't go into a writer route, but I like talking. I
Yeah,
went to MSL route, but you still have to write, doesn't matter what.
correct. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. So, well, and I want to also explore a little bit about you say you talked about product development. That one to me is a black box. I don't know how that works.
Yeah, well, it's different in drug versus dietary supplement, right? Dietary supplements they're not new to nature molecules. They're often combinations of things. And so our R&D groups work in concert with vendors that do specifically novel ingredient development. So for example, this is a really good example. There's a modified amino acid in green tea called theanine, and you might see it on shelves. You might take it yourself, but L-theanine, that is it's ingredient. It occurs naturally, not new to nature. But there is a company that has found out how to make that more bioavailable, how to make it consistently, how to make sure that the biomarkers are accurate and active and predictable all the time. So as a product development person, I interface with companies that do that kind of work rather than simply isolating things, and it might be different batch to batch because natural ingredients show up differently. So now there's a branded ingredient, and I might include that branded ingredient in a formula designed for whether it be focus, well, literally to help with focus, to help with sleep, to help with relaxation, all things that have been shown clinically to be useful for L-theanine at different dosages.
So that sounds like you have a team to work on this, or you do it all by yourself. I don't know how
It
that
it
works.
it often takes a team. I've done it with very large teams where the team includes things like marketing. It includes folks that they're looking at what ingredients are trending, and they're looking at sort of what's sort of already happened. So it's a back looking way. There's also people on the like, hey, these things don't go well together. There's a really great ingredient called black seed oil, and that has an active constituent of thymoquinone. It got very popular in recent years. That is a really cool ingredient, and be like, that'd be great to put that in something. But especially for the chemists listening, not everything mixes well when you put it in a capsule or a tablet. And so now I have chemical engineers looking at viscosities and flow rates and friability of the tablet, dissolution rates. So we get into that piece of things too. So we do a lot of bench work to make sure that that works properly. And then ultimately, hey, if you put two or three things together that have been clinically studied individually, do you know if those things work together, literally work together in a human? And so you might run in and do some clinical trial work either before you go to market with that or post market.
Wow. That blows my mind because I can imagine it's complicated, but I didn't know that complicated. So that must be super exciting to manage that kind of team. How is it like managing that kind of team?
Hard. I mean, no question about it. Like it's you get different personalities and different skill sets and try to get them all to work together. One thing that I've done to sort of develop leadership skills is to learn and understand facilitation. So meeting facilitation. I think that's one of the surprising things. In academia, you know, we have lots of committee meetings and lots of whatever meetings, but they're sort of often ongoing meetings. The difference in industry, at least this is my opinion, is that there are some standing meetings that occur, but we're headed towards a goal and there's always a tough deadline. And so it's like all of these things have to come together at the right time to make things work and to take all those different personalities. I actually studied meeting facilitation pretty extensively to understand that. So I'm the guy that pulls out the whiteboard and the flip charts and post-it notes, and we're having all of our ideas out there, trying to draw the people in that maybe are quiet and need to think about things, doing some like gamification of meetings so that we can bring people out of their shells so we actually get their opinion, bringing down the barriers between departments so there's not a us versus them mentality. And I think that especially if you're interested in moving into leadership, some of those softer skills are really critical.
From your wealth of experience and seeing so many people, hiring so many people, like, are those leaders made, like they're naturally shine out? Do you see people can just work on it and then become a leader? Like how do you tell who to promote?
Yeah, great question, and it's an unanswerable question, but I'll try to answer it
Mm,
anyway.
mm,
Is that some people do have natural leadership skills, and some people just have natural articulation skills, and I try not to confuse the two. Some people
oh,
are just good speakers, and we think that that's a good leadership quality, and it can be for sure, no question that that could be a good leadership quality. But the folks that I've found that actually excel in leadership are the people that are like great coaches, like great high school or college coaches, where other people want to do well for them. And I'll actually take myself out of it. The CEO that I work for right now is that kind of person.
mm.
She is a coach that I would run through a brick wall for. And so the way that she does it is she just has very high expectations, but she's always checking to be sure that you have what you need. And if you're overstressed, she can sense it. But if you're overstressed, but the work still needs to be done, there's no excuses really. So it's a high expectation level, but also that expectation level is throughout the organization, so you know that you're not the only one that or you're not being picked on for it. It just is a high performance organization.
So I'm gonna shift gear a little bit, and then I like just curious. You have all these experiences, and I saw you just finish your PhD, or
Yeah,
yeah, what
yeah.
made you think about going back to school?
I will shorten this as best I can, but I'll tell you that I was a chemist as an undergrad, and I got these really great opportunities to be a research chemist, and I got to work at cool places, and decided that that was not what I wanted to be. I was an inorganic chemist, and I just didn't see the value of what I was bringing on a day-to-day basis. And so I had a mentor at the time who was a breast cancer oncologist. And I said, I think I want to go to medical school. And he said, your brain isn't going to do well in medical school because you ask too many dang questions. And so he's like, maybe you should look at a research career. But I said, I kind of want something a little bit more clinical. And he's like, well, a medical scientist would be great. You should do an MD, PhD program if you're going to do it. But I do think you're going to struggle with medical school. So very long story short, I ended up going to chiropractic college because I wanted hands-on training. I wanted really good physiology and anatomy training. And I knew that that would launch me into other places. Did I have an interest in practicing chiropractic? Not necessarily. I knew that I would do other things with it. So I graduated and started to practice and was successful in doing that, sold the practice and moved on to, I almost immediately started a graduate degree in nutrition. Got the graduate degree in nutrition and okay, so what can I do with this? And that's when I started industry. During that time, I saw some really fantastic opportunities that were developing. So the nurse practitioner profession was really growing and developing and doing really interesting things. And I said, I think I want to do that. And there was a practical reason too, because as a chiropractor, I didn't prescribe, but I saw people with thyroid disorders. And it's like, well, you need to go back to your primary care. We need to get TSH and probably get on levothyroxine or something like that. And so it was another step for the patient. So I thought, what if I could skip those steps? So I went back and I got my associate's degree in nursing. I got a bachelor's degree in nursing. I got a master's degree in nursing and became a nurse practitioner. So long way around to get where I wanted to go. Sometime during that process, I got an MBA because I wanted to understand what all these people in industry were talking about. And so I had all this letter soup behind my name and had a fair amount of credibility, except for with the R&D people. I could talk their language, but I'd never designed a study myself. I never did the statistical analysis myself. I always relied on other people to do it for me. And so I said, I think that this is a life goal, not a career goal. I think I want to do a PhD program. So I ended up doing that. And just, yeah, like you said, I just finished recently. So I'm not the traditional got a PhD. Now, what do I do with it? It was always just in the back of my mind that I thought that those skills were so helpful, so useful. And now that I'm done with it, thank goodness, it is it is one of the most valuable things that I could have done. Also one of the hardest. So everybody who's out there who's finished, like I know what you've been through and and you have skills you just don't even know you have because you're taking usually vast amount of information. You're able to distill it. You're able to think about things in 10 different ways. And that's not normal. You think it's normal because you did it and you know how to do it. But for the average person working in corporate America and even in the life sciences and the health sciences, you're unique and you bring a lot of value.
Since you took a very different path, like what do you see are the special skills that PhD has that we can market to industry employees?
Yeah. So for example, one of the things that I look at, and I'm biased towards people with PhDs are people who can do consumer insight work. So if you're like, this is a totally like most PhDs in life sciences will have never heard of this, but consumer insight work is essentially surveying people, getting understanding of what they're asking. But of course, the output is only as good as the questions. Well, there is a whole section of market and consumer insight people that got marketing degrees, and they're good. And it's fine, but sometimes they're asking the wrong questions, and so the output isn't as good. When I found people who have PhDs, especially in the sciences, they tend to ask really profoundly better questions to do that consumer insight work. Because you can find about buying behaviors, you can find about like different demographics and persona graphics of who might buy a product, who might not buy a product, where the company or the business should be investing and spending money in, and then also how to reach them. And you're like, but I studied biology. It doesn't matter. If you have the wherewithal to finish a PhD, you have the wherewithal to get into that kind of work. And a similar but not as similar is information like user experience and user interface, so UX UI, very popular in Silicon Valley and those sorts of things, but it's expanded out to everywhere. Even in our dietary supplement company, we want to understand the behavior of healthcare practitioners who come to our website. What do they buy? Why do they buy it? What if we change this or that or the other thing about the website? How would they do things differently? And as I start talking about it, you can see that there's all of this disparate information that has to be integrated, and that takes a really good brain. And so there's
Mm.
opportunities there as well.
Yeah, I often said, I'll see if you agree with this is my saying. I always say that PhD teaches you how to go from knowing nothing to knowing enough that you can innovate in a very short period of time.
Correct.
Is that oh, you agree? Okay.
I
This is that
that I 100% agree with that. You can't innovate unless you sort of know it well enough to not necessarily master it, but be better than competent, right? You have to be better than competent. Most people really struggle to become competent in an area without 10 years of experience. Well, businesses don't have time for you to learn things for 10 years. You need to learn it, integrate it, get better than competent, and then innovate beyond that. What I've seen be problematic, and it's usually outside of kind of our fraternity of people, is people try to innovate too quickly. They're like, oh, this is a really good idea. Okay, you clearly didn't understand the market well enough to think that that's a good innovation. And then the company spends money that it shouldn't have spent.
and then like going on that path, as a head of a medical affairs, you've seen so many. You must have hired many masters and PhDs that not necessarily helps the practitioners, right? So wondering, what do you see that the characteristic maybe make those people successful in your industry? Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um, Good question. And I think it has to do with resilience. And one of the things that especially PhD graduates have is resilience, because you made it through, and you might have had a great advisor. And if you have a great advisor and they're coaching and nurturing and all of that, that's great. That's not normal, by the way. But sometimes the corporate environment is like that advisor that you wish you wouldn't have picked, or been assigned to, where there's just a lot of pressure and maybe they don't understand the work that you're doing. And so resilience in the fact of being able to build your case, stand on your opinion based on the information that you've either gathered or generated, is probably the key difference between people that do well in my world and those that don't. Those that continually ask like, "Ooh, I guess I don't know if I really believe my own opinion," aren't probably going to last in a corporate environment very easily, because well, it's sometimes a little bit, I don't want to use the word cutthroat, so I'm
Mm,
searching for a better word, but the fact
mhm.
is that there's other people that will have strong opinions, and you have to be able to just work through that. And that's hard. And I want to pause on this because I think it's actually important. As a scientist, you are open to always being wrong. But there comes a point where you develop your criteria, your plan, your opinion, that you're like, I might not know everything and I'm not going to know everything, but here are the paths of, like, future research, future direction, but I have to make a decision right now, or I have to provide the information as it is right now. And so um, it's a balance between your training and kind of what is needed and expected of you from the company.
Well, yeah, it's a mindset change. I experienced that myself as well. It's that, oh, yeah, of course, we don't know anything. Then this is maybe, 95% correct or
Yep.
not. Yeah,
Yep.
that is not gonna fly in
No.
business world. Yeah. Well, so that is definitely that's very very important message, I think, for the rest of the audience too. I don't think it's unique to this industry; it's in many industries.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. And I often get questions from master's students. Since you've gone through masters and then PhDs later, they often ask like, should I do a PhD? Um, I know everybody's different, but what would you say generally or to them?
Great question, actually. I mean, there's so much opportunity at the master's level, and I like to, because I've been asked the same question in a very similar way. I would say number one is you have to determine what you really want in your life, and that's sort of a bad question because nobody really wants to know what they know what they want to do with their life. But the fact is that think of it from the company side of things, and that can sometimes fulfill your need and your information. If you want to keep that door open to go down the tenured professor path, you got to have a PhD. There's no real way around that, or another terminal degree that they could consider. You're going to need that. The question is that if you want to work in industry and you're willing to work in industry, then the question is that if you have a PhD, I often have to pay more for you. So I can actually bring you in at a less expensive rate, which makes you more attractive to me if you only have a master's degree rather than a PhD. Right now, I have on my writing team, I have 2 people with doctorates and 2 people with master's degrees. And I actually started the people with master's degrees at a lower rate, but one of them became so valuable that I had to pay her more to keep her and retain her. She's now making more than those PhD or those doctoral holders. But it's by virtue of the output that she provided. But the reason that I grabbed her is because I could get her for a little bit of a lesser rate, and that's what my budget could afford at the time. So that's one consideration to think about, is that a master's degree often is enough in industry. Sometimes you will need a terminal degree if you want to advance into leadership. The D degrees are still attractive to boards of directors, to investors, and sometimes it's difficult. And take my example. Probably, and this is no disrespect to my first profession in chiropractic medicine, but nobody wanted their science and R&D led by a chiropractor. And even with all the other letters behind my name, that's still who I was. So until I got the other D degree, that's when investors and boards of directors and executive teams got a lot more comfortable saying, okay, you actually really do know what you're talking about based on your training. So I just explained both as being good options, and they are both good options, but I don't want people to dismiss their only having a master's degree as not being valuable. It can be incredibly valuable.
Yeah, it was actually you and helped me and prove to people who I tell is when they already decided they want to go into industry and they asked me do they want a PhD, I said, why don't you work first? You can
Mm-hmm.
always get your PhD later,
Mm-hmm.
right? When you're really passionate about it. And I always believe that you need to you do PhD only if you're really interested in the research, not for the title itself, because it's
Correct.
not worth it, the
It
time you
is.
invested it in. Yeah.
The opportunity cost is great, and everybody who's listening who's done this knows that you spend 3, 4, 6 years in a PhD program when you could have been earning a pretty good salary as a master's level person in industry. I always say, if you don't have that burning question about what you want to study and you're like, I'm going to start the PhD program, I'm going to take some of the didactic courses, and I'll figure out what I want to research later, don't do it. That you got to have that like burning fire. And just my example was that I saw accumulating data on exercise, especially aerobic exercise, affecting depression, major depressive disorder specifically. And it was a nice accumulating evidence, but it was sort of this web of evidence. And nobody had asked the question of like, hey, this is all from the practitioner standpoint and the controlled standpoint, but nobody has dived into or has dove into what the what the patient's perception of this, because individuals with major depressive disorder sometimes don't have the motivation to exercise, or their motivation waxes and wanes even more than the average person. So in a prescriptive way, is that the way that clinicians should be talking to patients about exercise for major depression? The answer was kind of profound, and some of this is yet to be published, but the reality is that it is a different type of prescription for exercise than for the average person to just be healthy. And so I had that burning question before day one of my PhD program, and I think that's what kept me going. But there were certainly times where I was like, do I really need this? Should I just leave? I can just leave. I think I should leave. No, I should finish it. That's pretty common too. But if you don't have the burning question, stick with your master's. It's valuable.
Kind of like tied into, I'm gonna ask the same question almost like in a different way. Like in people that you hire, do you really see a difference between a fresh out of school master and fresh out of school PhD? Do you really see a difference when,
There's
yeah?
uh there are a few differences.
Mm,
And this is a very interesting question, one I've actually contemplated. So I'm glad you asked it, because nobody's directly asked me this. And that is that the fresh out of grad school master's students are actually more confident than they should be, and PhD grads are less confident than they should be. And I'm like, and I taught at the master's level for 15 years, and so I knew what they were getting, and they come right out of school and think that they can solve all these really massive problems, and some of them can, but more commonly they don't have imposter syndrome at all. I mean, PhD new grads often do feel like that. They're like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know if I belong here. I'm just fresh. But master students have an uncommon confidence that often has to be tampered or down a little bit.
that's so interesting. I didn't realize that, but while you're describing it, I'm like, yeah, that's what I see as well. Wow, okay. That's because you have the sample size. I don't.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
funny thing is that, but in the corporate environment, sometimes the master's student shows better, or new grad shows better, because
Mm.
they're confident about everything. They're like, I studied this for 2 or 3 years, and so they can get more, I'll say, more attention or more resources or more whatever, but they look like they know what they're doing. But that confidence can turn around and bite them occasionally.
Yeah, but like sometimes that's what you need. I coach so many PhD folks that they're saying the imposter syndrome. Like that is what's holding you behind.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a good lesson that I hope the audience will get out of this. Like rethink and then keep your be more confident than where you are.
Yep.
Um, so last question I wanna, well actually last two. I'm gonna ask my really burning question because that's the question from my own experience. The challenge was dealing with hundreds of products. You mentioned at the beginning, I really wanted to ask that. I took a sales job at a biotech company. That's one of the job that didn't last very long because I
Yep.
couldn't deal with hundreds of products. How did you do well? I can't even read all of the product briefs.
Yeah, one step at a time. Like it really is like, okay, I had to be disciplined to, because you start developing more and more questions as you start digging into a product. You're like, well, what about this? Well, what about this? I need to know mechanism of action. I need to know the data on the clinical trials. I need to know patient selection criteria. And what you need to be disciplined for, at least in the early stages, is to know when to stop asking the question. You might have the interest in knowing it, and you might be the curious person that wants to know it, and that's what makes you great. But the discipline to stop asking questions about a product portfolio is also important, because you have other things that you need to get done. And so it's like, ask what you need to ask to be able to get, or read what you need to read, but get the information that you want, and then be disciplined to move on to the next one. Yes, it hundreds and hundreds of products. The company that I worked with was was good in the fact that they didn't say, okay, study all of these and know everything about them, and then we'll get you to work. You learned on the fly, and you worked as you went. And when you didn't know, you asked somebody that did know, and you go from there. So I'm very lucky to have had that type of opportunity.
Wow. So this, I'm glad to meet somebody who could do it. I was feeling so overwhelmed. Yeah,
Yeah.
but thank you for that advice. And
You
yeah,
brought up a good point, and sorry to take
yeah,
this in
no,
a little bit
please.
different direction, but you said
Yeah.
sales. I work with the sales team really closely in my current role and in previous roles, and I have never been, I've never had the title of salesperson, but I've always tried to think like a salesperson. Like if we're doing new product development or if we're doing any of the things that I've done, I want to know who the people at the tip of the spear who have to interact with the customers are going to need, and I want them to be
Oh.
supported. And so I've always thought of like, okay, what are they going to need? What's the compelling story? What's the compelling piece of data that they're going to need? And how can I explain it to them in a way that they can explain it to the customer, so it's not going to be over the customer's head or patronizing to the customer, but also my sales team, who may not have technical background, can also understand it enough to repeat it, say it, and understand it. So taking the perspective and learning what other people in your organization are going to need from your output. I always ask, I'm like, okay, you asked me for this thing. Tell me how you're going to use it. Tell me what you're going to need it for. Tell me why it's relevant to your part of the business, your responsibilities. And over the course of the last 15 years, now it's really easy for me to understand that. But at first, it was really hard. So be open and ask questions of your colleagues.
Yeah, you did MBA quite earlier on, and I'm doing my MBA now just because.
Yeah.
So how did that influence how you think? Because you talk about you could think like for sales. Is that before, after, or how'd that work?
I don't know, it was sometime in the middle. I was doing kind of like what you'd consider like an associate MSL would do. I would do a lot of
Mm.
product trainings internally for the sales team. And so I got accustomed to that. And they became friends of mine, right? I still keep in touch with a lot of them. But after I moved on and got sort of promoted within that company, I had to interact more with marketing. And current and contemporary marketing is just as complicated as medical science in my mind. Like they have their own vernacular, they have their own way of doing things. They certainly have their own methods of spreadsheets and pivot tables, and how they interact with finance, which is another language. I just didn't have any of that base language to communicate with them, and so that's why I ended up doing it. I loved my business program, and I think that a PhD with an MBA really is a like the super valuable package. If I had to go back and do it all over again, I think I'd probably do PhD MBA, and that would set me up for similar success with maybe out some of the pain I've had.
You explore others, so now you're telling others people your learnings. So that tied very well into my final questions. Like any final advice for our audience? Like you, where you are right now, probably a lot of our audience want to be eventually. They don't even know they could. So any final advice for them?
Well, I'll be biased. Take a look at the dietary supplement and nutraceutical industry. It is not it's not for the faint of heart. It's real science, and we do really cool stuff. We make really cool products, and it's a growing industry. And frankly, some of my, not just within our company, but like I'll say my colleague companies, we're all looking for really bright people to take this industry and do more with it. And there's money to be had. So you probably won't get super rich and all of that, and it might not be as cushy as some of the medical device or pharma companies. But keep an open mind to adjacent industries that are that sort of fill your cup similarly, about being able to do your science, being able to be compensated for it. But yeah, our industry is looking and open to PhDs in a variety of different tasks. And the nice thing is you might get more responsibility than you would in I'll say a more rigorous pharma or medical device, I'll say more mature industry, where it's like, oh, you're going to do this and you're going to do this for 3 years, and then you can do this. And then there isn't as much rigor to the promotion ladder in an industry that's still in the growth pattern and in the I'll say slight immaturity as compared to pharma and medical device.
Wow, I'm tempted. Yeah, thank you so very much. Like I learned so much today. It was amazing. And yeah, if everybody, if you like today's episode and want to hear more career journeys, please click like and subscribe down below. We'll be back with more education and informative videos to help you with your career transition. Thank you again very much, Corey, and we hope to hear more of you in the
All right.
future.
Thanks for having me.